went to one of these shacks. I was taken by a friend of mine who was a Black Assemblies of God minister, and he took me to the little place, and I said, please tell us how we can help. What do you need? How can we serve you? And he said, we don't need money. We don't need clothing and blankets and food. What we need is you. Come to where we are. Okay. See us.
Yeah.
Hear us.
Solidarity.
Solidarity. And I mean, he was basically proclaiming the kingdom. Only through that kind of connection do you discover two things. One, the reality of how people who are part of our body, what they're experiencing. You experience apartheid through their eyes and their bodies.
Yes.
That was the first thing. The second thing is that you only truly discover the love of God. This was a text that God used to renew my mind.
Yes.
Together with all the saints, we are able to comprehend the length and breadth and depth and height. And if I leave you out, I leave out something of God. Worshipping with people of color.
Yes.
I just thought, wow, what have I been missing?
You're listening to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Costa Mitchell. Costa is a church planner, pastor, and the former national director of the Vineyard movement in South Africa. This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums, and every Monday look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, monk drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
All right. Hey, everybody. Adam Russell here with the Ferment podcast. Super special guest today. A new friend, Costa Mitchell, is with me. Say hello, Costa.
Hi, Adam.
That's right. Hey, Costa, you were the national director in South Africa for how many years?
21.
Okay. And we were chatting off mic just a moment ago. Before that, even you were pastoring and you planted the first vineyard church outside of North America.
Yes. So the first church first vineyard church planted outside of North America was in 1982. We planted in Johannesburg.
That's amazing. See, all this time, and this shows you how you make up your own history and the gaps. I just assumed that maybe John and Ellie planted in England first, but you beat them.
I think that's kind of carefully placed propaganda on the part of John.
Well, when did they plant?
Do you know? I believe it was about 1985.
Okay, so you got about a couple years
later. Yeah.
So it's not even contestable.
Not even close.
That's great. Well, I just want to say I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you.
We're at a national conference. I'm glad A, that you came all this way, and then B, I'm glad that you're sitting with me and we're going to talk.
Yes.
And
enjoying this.
Here's what I want to do, if it's okay. I want to talk to you about being a good leader. Maybe that real specific conversation. But before we do that, I just want people to know you.
Yes.
Because I think people here in the United States have they've heard your name.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a handful remember your talk a few years ago at the Global Family Conference. But I don't think people know your story. So can you just tell me, where are you from? How'd you grow up?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a typical South African boy. Born in Johannesburg and grew up there. My dad was a Greek. He was born in Greece, and then
that's why you're so handsome, right?
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
And lovable.
That's right.
So my dad had been he and his family came to South Africa when he was very young, 2-year-old, and so he was a naturalized South African, and that's the reason why our name is not Michalopoulos but Mitchell.
Yeah.
Because he had changed it to fit in with the business community.
Sort of westernized it a little bit.
Yeah. So, born and raised in the Johannesburg area, and then later in another part of South Africa in the Cape province. And was so I was Greek Orthodox by.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Baptism.
Like growing up, were you Greek Orthodox? Yeah.
Yeah, and we were also fairly typical of many Greek people in that we would go to church twice a year.
Christmas and Easter?
Yeah, but only if it was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And my mother was a South African of British, Dutch, German stock.
Yeah.
And so we were that kind of mixed bunch, the United Nations in one house. And so I grew up in that sort of world that was completely artificial, of being white South Africans in Africa.
Yes.
And
it's a very unique experience, isn't it?
It was. And really, as I look back, oblivious to the realities of apartheid because of the way we were cocooned. And there was censorship of press and radio. We didn't have television, so all of those things. So from that point of view, again, growing up with blinkers and so many blind spots.
Yeah, okay, so let me just ask a couple questions off of those two details. One, when did you meet Jesus in a personal way?
So I went to university, had always wanted to be a vet. And so I went
like a veterinarian?
Veterinarian.
Yes.
So I went to study veterinary science. And within the first 3 months of starting that course of study, I became an atheist.
Why? Just the biology?
Yeah, because of science.
Yeah.
So the whole line of atheistic evolution that's shoved down your throat when you go to a faculty like that. And then just a few months after that, about 6 months after that, through a young guy who came and stayed at the digs that I was staying in, who just his witness, his testimony about Jesus and his life spoke very loudly to me, and so I prayed the prayer of the suicidal prayer for an atheist. God, I don't believe in you, but if you were real, and I met Jesus, and everything changed. He messed up my life completely.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how many times people come to faith just because someone was kind to them?
Yeah,
like another Christian really treated somebody in a great way, and that's what really draws people.
Yep.
That's the loudest evangelism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you prayed that prayer, did anything happen?
Yeah. So, what happened was immediately I had an overwhelming sense of peace, and fell asleep, slept like a baby, and when I woke up the next day, the two things that became so different for me was one, I noticed the world of nature differently. It was like it was like I was alive to birds singing outside the window and the blueness of the sky and things like that. So that was the first thing, and the second thing was that I had fallen in love with people. I used to say quite proudly that I wanted to be a vet because the more I saw of people, the better I liked my dog.
Yeah.
And suddenly I just became aware of people. And for me, particularly, it's like apartheid was destroyed in my heart from that moment.
Is that when you kind of woke up to the horrors of apartheid?
Yeah. I looked out of the window of the place I was staying in, and I noticed some black people walking past, and I'd fallen in love with them. And that was not my own doing.
Yeah, I can even see right now you're emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still feel it. Amen. That's the work of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when that happened, what did you do? Did you decide I'm going to be a pastor? I'm going to work for justice? Like what was your response?
It took a little longer than that. So I stayed, I would say probably within the next 6 months on from there. In fact, two things happened. The first was that through another guy who was involved in Teen Challenge Ministry, who was an outstanding evangelist, we had met him, and through his ministry, a number of my friends also came to Christ. And I saw that there was something that he had that I didn't, and that was the power of the Spirit. And so I asked him to pray for me, and I was filled with the Holy Spirit. And so that was like...
Did you speak in tongues?
I did.
All right.
Yeah, and so that became in fact, another one of those experiences where I had been taught through this guy that had led me to Christ. He was a great evangelical, but completely cessationist.
Yeah.
And so I had been discipled in the view that gifts of the Holy Spirit were not for today and stuff. So I started speaking in tongues while my mind was saying, I don't believe in this. And kind of laughing at myself while I was doing it. But also knowing that this is what I was born for, was to speak the praises of God in a heavenly language. Anyway, so that became the next step in a process where God was kind of extracting me from the world of veterinary science, and more I became aware of a call. And
did you feel like it was a call to pastor, or was it just like I feel compelled to do what God wants? Like, was it general or what?
It was quite. In fact, I kind of share this story in talking about calling. That calling doesn't always work out the way it sounds like it's going to.
Talk about that, because people who are listening are going to be all over that.
Yeah. So I got this calling through a passage in Joel chapter 2 that talks about multitudes in the valley of decision, and the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. And so, by the way, at the time, one of my favorite things to do was to listen to a radio program called The Hour of Decision, which is Billy Graham preaching. And I loved Billy Graham's preaching, and I pictured myself as this Billy Graham standing in front of multitudes in the valley of decision.
Yes.
So I thought
that's
a call to evangelism.
Yeah, and you thought, I'm going to be the African Billy Graham.
That's it. I like that. So anyway, that was the what I thought was the gist of it. And I remember times, because shortly after that, God spoke to me finally to quit the veterinary at the end of my second year of studying vet science, and called me to ministry. So I got involved in youth ministry. We were doing street evangelism.
What kind of church were you at?
And that was an Assemblies of God church.
Yeah, so you were charismatic by now all the way. Yeah.
And that was the beginning. It was through that street evangelism that the first hippies were led to Christ on the streets and then brought to the church. And so
the Jesus people hippie thing was even happening in South Africa.
It happened.
It was worldwide.
Almost simultaneously.
Yes.
So that was 1968, 69.
Wow.
And so the guy that was regarded as like the hippie king of Johannesburg came to Christ, and then more and more people, and it was a people movement. We saw thousands of people from that counterculture coming to Christ and through that church's ministry over the next few years.
Did you baptize them in the ocean?
No.
I was going to say,
we were in Johannesburg, so there's no ocean.
Okay. You weren't in Cape Town then?
No,
okay. I didn't know if you were going full Lonnie Frisbee on this.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just maybe bump up here a second. When did you meet John Wimber? Or what was that?
Yeah, again, a whole series of things, divine appointments happened. And through a friend of mine called Dave Owen, he told me that he had invited John and a group from the Yorba what was still then Calvary Chapel, had come to our church in Cape Town. By then I was in Cape Town. I was leading an an Assemblies of God church in Cape Town, and they came and they gave us a set of tapes called "The Church I Would Join" by John, and I listened to that and I said, but these are all the things God has been speaking to me about, including things like intimacy and worship, including everyone gets to play, the whole thing of empowering and equipping people for the works of ministry, etc. So there were a number of things about it that, and as many Vineyard people will tell you, when they first heard John, they said, he's been reading my mail. You know, there was just this sense of resonance.
Yeah, he was articulating something.
He was articulating what was in us.
Yeah, and many people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we always use that expression, you know, Vineyard is not something you join, it's something you discover you are.
That's right.
And so that was the thing for me as well. And the following year, John came to do a church growth seminar in a church that I was attending. Well, not where I was attending, a nearby church that was in fact being pastored by Alexander Fenter at the time. And so that's when I met John, 1981. And we then, after that, asked him if he would help us plant a church like that in South Africa. And he prayed about it and agreed. And they brought the team that is the same team that also on their way home stopped in London, and those first meetings at Chorley Wood and Holy Trinity Brompton happened.
Really?
And so he came, and we had meetings. He basically did the Signs and Wonders seminar with us, and we saw hundreds of people healed, led to Christ in the streets, in the shopping malls, wherever.
Yeah.
And by the time the team left, we had started with we'd gathered a group of about 60. By the time they left, we had 150 people. We baptized 150 people. And
that's amazing.
That was the beginning. That was the first church.
And then, how was your heart? Were you just exploding?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going...
Did you feel like you were in the middle of the middle?
Yep,
yeah.
Absolutely. I was going, where have you been all my life? You know,
wow.
This is the full expression of it, of what I really had felt like. This is what I was born for.
Yeah, man. Okay, so then you get your church planted. How long before you start planting other churches?
That is a very interesting journey as well, because we had felt we didn't want to contribute to the kind of disunity and, you know, next flavor of the month kind of syndrome. So what we had felt to do was to just plant that church, and then from that church become a resource and bless the wider body of Christ. And so we did from 1982 until 1988, we did renewal work all over the country. We had planted,
mostly South Africa, though.
Yes, South Africa.
Yes,
we had planted a second church in Soweto. That was what is, I think, many people know. Alexander Fenter had launched a kind of an integrated community, like a prophetic community of people from Johannesburg, who the white suburbs of Johannesburg, who went into the township of Soweto, the black residential township, and started a community there so it was called the Joweto Vineyard.
Got it.
And then there were also two churches in Durban, led by Samuel Kiston and George Govender, who were two people who had also come and met John when we had that 1982 conference.
Yeah.
And made it into, you know.
Yeah, so your initial intention wasn't to plant a bunch of churches, but it was to empower and encourage.
Yeah, become like a prophetic community, so to speak, or a resource for the church.
Okay, so how much was happening with you guys, or how did you embody the work of justice through those years? Was that a major part of your work? Was racial reconciliation a part of your message?
Very much so.
Yeah, can you just talk to us about that? Because that's so amazing.
We had before that, God had done a work in our hearts about the fact that there is no such thing as a monocultural church. That's a contradiction in terms. That's an oxymoron. So we were very intentional about. And this was against the law in South Africa in those days, was to go into townships, white people going into what are called black townships.
Yes.
And
so that was illegal.
It was illegal.
But you guys did it.
Yeah, we did.
So I'm reminded of maybe that passage in Acts, we have to obey God, right? Rather than men.
That's right.
Yes.
So we had cultivated friendships, and we had small groups that were operating and the Duetto one became like a further extension of that into Sunday church as well, but we had connection with people in that manner over between those years.
How were you received?
Very wonderfly. It was
really okay.
Yeah, I was leading a Bible school at the same time when we had planted that church. So I'd started a daughter school of a ministry in the U.S. called Christ for the Nations Institute in Dallas, Texas. I'd started a daughter school for that school, and we had a number of people coming from, some of them from Soweto and Alexandra. We even had 2 guys who walked 1,000 miles from Malawi to come to Bible school in Johannesburg.
That's an African story.
It is an amazing African story.
What an amazing African story.
In fact, that became the first open door for us to return the compliment, so to speak, and to visit with those guys and their families. And so our missions adventure began through them.
So in the black townships, you were received warmly.
Very warmly.
Okay, so what did white churches think?
The church was still, up until 1989, the church was still divided on the issue, because most evangelical churches were of the view, and the Pentecostal churches were part of that, were of the view that we needed to submit to the authorities.
Romans 13.
Yeah, so Romans 13.
Yeah.
So that was their go-to verse any time that you said anything. So we got into a lot of trouble. In fact, in my Assemblies of God days, we got into trouble with the leaders of the movement on the issue of, for example, bringing people of color into what were previously white churches. When going to conferences and eating in the dining room with my black friends, when there were separate dining rooms, with the excuse that people like their own kind of food.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it
was just a tumultuous time.
It was.
That's how it sounds to my American ears.
It was, and of course, so 1985 was the beginning of what was called the state of emergency in South Africa, when the army moved into the townships, and this was a few years after the initial Soweto uprising of youth against the apartheid regime, and and the people that we had connected with in the township, many of them had been on the barricades in some of those protest actions in their townships, and they became our brothers. So we would and of course most of those people were viewed by essentially white churches and organizations as communist, revolutionaries, terrorists, etc.
Yeah, it's funny how we pick particular labels.
Yeah.
To do some heavy lifting for us.
That's
right?
it.
If we can just give someone a label that makes them a bad person.
That's right.
Then we can be justified in whatever we think. Right?
Quite.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, you're on the kind of like leading edge of racial reconciliation. You're in the middle of what the Spirit is doing. You're obeying God rather than men. Was music or worship, was it a part of that? I'm wondering, like, did it play into racial reconciliation? How did that work? Because when I think of Africa, I just think of like the African rhythms. I think of the unique African harmonies.
Yes.
And I would imagine maybe there could be a connection point in music. I don't know if there was. Is there?
Definitely.
Yes.
In
Tell me
fact,
about
for
that.
me, that was one of my conversion experiences. You know, we have many of those.
Yes.
And one of my conversion experiences was going to black churches when I was in the Assemblies of God and going to the townships. And we had gone in for two reasons. One was because of the follow-ups of a conference called SACLA, South African Christian Leadership Assembly, that was called by an organization called African Enterprise in South Africa. And so having tasted the flavor of real multicultural church in that context, what we then did was we repeated that in our regions. So I was leading a thing in Cape Town of that, and so we went in to townships to share, just to be with our brothers and sisters.
So that became a way to connect.
A way to connect.
Yes.
The second thing that happened was that because people were being forcibly removed from their homes, and
Who was being forcibly removed?
black people. So
Why?
One of the apartheid laws was what was called the Group Areas Act,
Okay.
which meant that certain areas were proclaimed to be white residential, and if there was any person of color living in that area, they would be taken to what became the townships, the black townships. Wow. People would come, they would put up shacks, and the government would come the next day with bulldozers and bulldoze the shacks. And so we became involved in that, going to places, and I'll never forget the moment.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it.
Yeah. It brings emotion to you.
Where I went to one of these shacks.
Yes.
I was taken by a friend of mine who was an Assemblies of God, a black Assemblies of God minister, and he took me to the place and sat in this little place, and I said, "Please tell us how we can help. What do you need? How can we serve you?" And he said, "We don't need money. We don't need clothing and blankets and food. What we need is you. We want you."
What did he mean by that? Or what did you take it to mean
What he
by?
meant by that is come to where we are.
Okay.
See us.
Yeah.
Hear us.
Solidarity.
Solidarity. And so, and I mean, he was basically proclaiming the kingdom, that it had to do with only through that kind of connection do you discover two things. One, you discover the reality of how people who are part of our body are, what they're experiencing. You experience apartheid through their eyes and their bodies.
Yes.
That was the first thing. The second thing is that you only truly discover the love of God. This was a text that God used to renew my mind.
Yes.
Together with all the saints, we are able to comprehend the length and breadth and depth and height. And if I leave you out, I leave out something of God.
Yes.
And so worshiping with people of color,
Yes.
I just thought, wow, what have I been missing?
Yeah.
So coming back to your question about worship, for me, worshiping in the context of black churches was life-changing, and which is the reason why I think you're aware that only after 10 years of nagging John Wimber, did we finally get the license to get Vineyard Music South Africa
Yes.
launched, and of course recorded what are still, for me, some of my favorite albums of all time.
Yes.
Including the what is called Wonderful Mercy album. Yes. So that what we heard there was, and I've had the privilege of hearing it in 22 nations now, is the Vineyard's song and the Vineyard's values in worship expressed in the languages and the rhythms and the instrumentation of Africa.
Well, what I love about your story, and especially what you just said there, is those are documents of the Vineyard song in the context of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And really the work of building the kingdom,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Costa, that's a beautiful story. You were making me cry. You start quoting scriptures to me, and you start preaching to me, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. Oh, that's so good. Well, at the risk of running away the spirit from a beautiful story, I do want to talk to you about leadership.
Yes.
If it's okay with you.
Sure.
Could we just do this? Could you just tell me about, in your opinion, what is leadership? There's a lot of pastors, there's a lot of worship leaders, team members listening to this.
Yes.
What is leadership?
I think of leadership as, I call it, obviously it's called in Romans 12 a spiritual gift.
Yes.
Which basically, and Paul describes what that means when he introduces the topic of spiritual gifts in that passage, where he goes, by the grace that is in me, I'm appealing to the grace that is in you. And he says, and now I want you to operate according to the grace that is in you. So obviously that's a different use of the word grace. And I relate it to Jesus when the woman was healed by touching the hem of his garment. And he said, I perceive that virtue has flowed from me. And so I think there of grace as a force, as a life force that flows out from people when we exercise spiritual gifts.
Yes.
And the gift of leadership is no different. Yeah. I think of it as something that is inside us and that can only move out from us when we exercise, when we put ourselves on the line, when we put ourselves in a place where if God doesn't show up, nothing's going to happen here. Nothing's going to work. So leadership, the way that we do that is the Greek word for leadership there is the word Christomenos, which means to step to the front in order to take people to a goal.
Go first.
Yeah, go first. So leaders go first and eat last, right?
That's a great one.
So leaders step forward. A leader is a person who steps forward, but with the goal, the best goal, or the future, the best future of the people he or she is wanting to lead in mind.
I love
Not
this.
their own position in mind, but the best future for these people.
I love this.
Now, of course, there's even there are some subtle dangers in that because I don't get to decide what their best future is. I get to discover it in the journey.
Okay, can you talk about the difference between deciding and discovering? Because I think this is a big deal because, I just think of a lot of, especially modern business style leadership. It's almost like, well, the charismatic leader decides.
That's right. Yeah.
And then
I get the vision and you follow me. Yeah.
Yes.
That's it. So again, it's an interesting dynamic between those two things. I believe that God gives vision to an individual.
Yes, I do too.
But he doesn't give all the details of it. I think that I need, for example, if God gives me vision, I need my wife to color it in with me. I need the people who I think, when I say, this is what I'm sensing, this is the future we're heading towards, do you want to come?
Yes.
Then I need to stop along the way and say, tell me about what you heard when I said that. What do you see? What motivates you? What lights up your eyes when I talk about it? And each of them will have a different angle on that. According to their own gifting, according to their where they are in their spiritual journey. And we need all of the types of all of the spiritual gifts. We need the encouragers, we need the people, we need the administrative organizer people. We need so each of those has a role to play, coloring in the picture of vision.
Well, and something you just said a moment ago that I really like, you just said a leader will ask questions from people. And so it immediately kind of stuck in my head, and I go, oh, maybe that's a good leadership practice.
Yes.
Not just to tell people things, but to ask people things. So maybe a good leader is someone who asks lots of questions and
is a good listener. Yeah. So again, you look at Jesus' leadership style.
Yeah.
It seems that not only did he ask a lot of questions and then listen, but he answered questions with questions. So he was like constantly wanting people to think through, because it's only then that we have followership with integrity, is when people are following because of an internal reason, not because the leader said so.
Yeah.
Because that's, in fact, the only way that people are formed. And our job is not to take people to the goal, but also to have them formed and transformed in the journey.
That's right. That's right. Well, I want to maybe dig down into that, because one of the questions I wrote down for you, and you're already touching on it, is this. To you, what's unique about Jesus' style of leadership?
Oh, so many things. I think the most obvious one is servanthood.
Yeah.
That he served, and again, there's subtlety in this, because it's like, for me, the biggest frustration I have had in 48 years of ministry is to see leaders who are in it for themselves and for their own fame and followership.
Yeah, build my platform.
Yeah, build my platform. Give me a platform. So, but what people ignore the strongest statement that Jesus made in his entire earthly ministry was about leadership, where he said, the leaders or the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over their people, and exercise authority over them. And then he said, not so with you.
Yeah, Mark chapter 10.
Yeah, don't even think about it, essentially. Yeah. He uses such a strong expression that he's like going, I spit out that idea. It will not even get past my throat when you think like that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, what he is saying and what he goes on to say is, he that would be first among you must be last.
Yes.
Must become your servant. And he that would be in front must be your slave. And so, now, again, the way a lot of us think about that, because we're business people and because we're looking for a good deal, is that we go, oh, that's the way to get the deal.
Yeah, we just think, oh, that's the shortcut.
Yeah, that's the shortcut.
Yeah, that's the coupon.
Yeah, there we go. So do servanthood so that.
Yes.
That's not what it's saying. I believe what he's saying is, be a servant, and God, in due season, will give you authority, but you mustn't desire the authority, you must desire the servanthood.
Yeah. Just for the pleasure of helping people.
Exactly. And if that's all you do, if you do that just for one person, there's authority, but it's all in heaven, actually.
Yeah.
And how you get paid, Wimber's old expression, the pay is the same, whether you work for 1 day or 10 or 50 years.
Yeah, that's kind of like Jesus' parable, right?
Yeah.
The guys who showed up late, they got the same.
Same pay.
Yeah, and just in even what you're saying here, Costa, I'm just sort of reminded, in my mind anyway, like contrasting between sort of typical paradigms of leadership that exist now, and the leadership of Jesus. Jesus doesn't coerce people.
No.
He's not heavy-handed with people.
No.
And I've been reflecting on this little detail in the Gospels, that Jesus rarely makes anyone do anything. He's always the inviter.
That's right.
Like he says to the disciples,
yes,
follow me, right?
Yeah. And there must have been something so compelling about him for them to just drop what they were doing.
Yeah, I like that you use that word compelling, right?
Yeah.
I've been trying to think about leadership in terms of compelling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rather than make you do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's where it comes back to that concept I was talking about earlier of virtue. Maybe the most popular definition of leadership over the last 20 years has been one that says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
Now, I think it is probably more than influence, but it's not less than.
Yeah.
But again, the question, when you think about what is influence, influence is, again, it's a fluid thing. It's something that flows. It's something that flows from the leader into and around, and then back from those people back to the leader. So it's like a tributary of a river that of life and of benefit.
Yeah.
I think influence comes from the fact that people get, to use an old Christian cliche, blessed by the leader.
Blessed is a great Christian cliche.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So people will, again, follow with integrity someone who, the little phrase that comes to my mind about Jesus, here's something so unique about Jesus. In many cases, in several cases, he called people by the name of what they would become. He calls them by their future.
Yeah,
so he says, "Hi, Simon, you will be Peter."
Rock.
Yeah.
I'm going to build something on you.
I'm going to build something on you. I'm going to make of you this frightened dove, this shaking reed. I'm going to make of you a rock, a consistent man.
Yeah, and there's a sense in which that's some sort of a prophetic form of leadership, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
So one person said this to me, what I received from you is the sense that you believed in us. You believed in us. So I think leaders are people who see potential in others and then invite them into that potential.
I love that.
And so they become that future that they're heading
I love
towards.
that. I love that. It's invitational.
Yeah.
It's aspirational.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has, to use your words a moment ago, has their best interest in mind.
Yes.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting how often, like, I can't see the future of myself, or I can't see who I really am, but you can?
Yes.
Or, someone else may not be able to see who they are.
Yes.
But I can come into the room.
Yes.
And I'm instantly aware
Yes.
of their gifts, their talents, the
Yes.
callings,
Yes.
the way that they fit into this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is, I believe, the key characteristic of a leader is that not only do they have vision about the group and the church or whatever it is that they're leading, but they are able to articulate vision that, again, resonates in someone else's heart. Again, like I explained with John Wimber's function, it's like he announced something and that was in us.
It was already there.
Yeah, it was already there, but he gave language to it. I think it was his unique gift, was the ability to articulate what was in the hearts of so many.
Maybe if we just went slightly theological here, the way you said that reminded me, God creates the whole world with words, right?
Yes.
So it's the articulation of heavenly speech that makes things a reality.
Yes.
There's a sense in which, maybe to use your language, and I kind of like this image, is, leaders are seeing something, but there's something about their articulation that brings it to form.
Yes.
Right? And I've seen this over and over, and I personally believe there's a sense in which this is one of the ways that we reflect the divine image of God,
I agree.
who is a creator.
I agree.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Another question here. Costa, can you talk to me about how we could maybe partner with God to see our leadership grow? How could we deepen our gift? How could we really mature into it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of flicks a couple of switches in my mind about. I often say to people, and it links to the previous question about how did Jesus lead. I think Jesus led in the same way that he did ministry, which was, I only do what I see the Father doing. The words I say to you are words I've heard from the Father before I said them to you. And so he was a reflective leader. He was as someone said in this conference, he didn't initiate, but he was responding all the time to what he saw the Father doing, what he heard the Father whisper in his ear. So the first thing is about intimacy, is about getting alongside close enough so that when we articulate anything, all we're doing is we've been eavesdropping on the Trinity.
Yes.
Amen. And the Father and the Son have had a conversation, and we go, I agree with that. This is what we're going to do now.
Yes.
And so the only things that really work when it comes to this thing called ministry, whatever form it takes, including leadership, are the things that where we have connected somehow with the mind of God. And so that leads us to two things that it says about Jesus. We beheld his glory. We saw his life emanating or overflowing out of him. And how did it manifest? Full of grace and truth. Grace and truth. So that's something that as a leader, I every day would go before God and say, today, give me grace and truth in every connection that I make with people, and every email I write, every blog, anything that I do, let it be filled with grace and truth so that your life is seen in the things that I do, in the decisions I make, in the way I lead. And another way of saying that is I need to have the grace of acceptance and love and otherliness. You know, this is about people's well-being. It comes back to your previous point. People's well-being in my mind. Not my platform or fame and fortune. The second thing is truth, which manifests itself in the form of wisdom. So I pray the prayer every time I have a conversation with people, God, I lack wisdom. I like praying that prayer because it's one of the ones that are in the book.
It's got a promise.
It's got a promise.
Yeah.
If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and God will give it to him liberally. So I say, God, please, 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 I'm dumb. I don't have what it takes. I don't have the information. So please give me some of yours.
Yes.
Give me your wisdom. And hopefully in every, whether it's a counseling session, whether it's a meeting with another leader, whether it's preaching, teaching, writing, a telephone call, God, let this reflect your grace and truth, your wisdom and your overwhelming love, unconditional love for this person.
And one of the things I love about that James passage you just quoted, it seems, especially with the way that James wrote it, that the bar for wisdom is very low. Like if you are wise enough to admit that you don't have it,
yes,
you have it.
You get some, yeah.
Yes, isn't that it? It's like, well, okay, I can do that.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
amen,
yes.
amen. All right, let me ask you another maybe big question that you can riff on here for a moment, especially because it kind of grows out of your life. As our leadership grows, how can we stay near to God? Because like you start out as, you're going to vet school, then you become a believer, and then shortly after that, you're youth minister, and then you become a church planter. You're doing works of reconciliation, but then God calls you, and the gifts of leadership that He's given you, He calls you to be a national director for the entire Vineyard movement in a whole country. That's not where you started.
No.
Okay, and I know in my own life that as leadership grows, sometimes time evaporates,
yes.
And then all of a sudden, the very things that maybe gave me leadership or gave me connection are gone. So I'm always very interested. Costa, how have you stayed close to God as your leadership increased?
The real answer to that is that I haven't always, and learned how important that is very often by default or by hard experience. So there have been times when I've been aware I've either run ahead of God or I've run on a rabbit trail and left Him behind, and then I experienced the the effects of that in the form of burnout, in the form of fatigue, in the form of frustration, and then letting my natural gifting replace what we've just talked about, the constant need for asking God for His grace and truth. So as I said,
failure has been a teacher.
Oh yes, failure has been a teacher, and I've had it in one particular case as a major burnout episode in my life, and after that, in fact, in the healing that I went through, I experienced an amazing encounter with God. As it happened at Anaheim Vineyard when we came for a conference in 1995, and God restored my soul in a very short space of time. And then, as I was kind of getting up off the floor after 45 minutes and a lot of tears and snot on the floor, I heard him say this. I heard him say, "From now on, I want you to do only what gives you life, and only what reflects mine." And so, I think the two things that I learned out of that, it also happened to coincide with when I first came across Ignatian Spirituality.
Oh, is that when you kind of woke up to that?
Yeah. So I had a wonderful colleague we had planted a third church in Johannesburg at that point, and I befriended other pastors in the neighborhood where I was, and one of them was an Anglican vicar who led Ignatian retreats and open door retreats, and so I learned from him, and I began the practice of Ignatian spirituality in the form of both Lectio Divina and using the
like examines and whatnot.
Twice or three times a day.
Yeah,
and
just building a rhythm. Yeah.
So much more time, much more reflective time.
Yeah.
And I think for me that is my particular repentance, because I'm an A-type,
Go get it.
Yeah. What's it? Ready, fire, aim.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot from other kind of disciplines, like just things like planning, goal setting, all of those kind of things. But over and over, I've had to make sure that even that is not a reflection of my will, but of what is God saying.
Yeah.
And so, very important for me to make a practice out of engaging with God's presence through the day.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Part of what I hear in what you're saying as well is something that I think that we're waking up to in the Vineyard, which is we want and we expect and we have a history of God's intervention.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
changing everything in a moment.
Yes.
Like we've seen it and we believe it and we want it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And at the same time, we know that there's another side of that coin, which is daily, slow, gradual, rhythmic. And we need both, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and I think that's what I hear in your story is...
Yes.
Yeah.
You see, again, I mean, if we think it's a no-brainer, really, because if I think back over many conversations I had with John Wimber back in the day, and of course his heritage as a Quaker, a person who would spend hours in both the Word and in quiet contemplation every day of his life, waiting, and again in his way of doing ministry. So, as you say, what people so often remember, the takeaway that people have even from the conferences is zip, zap, bam,
done.
It's done. But they don't know what went into it before in terms of waiting on God. And again, John was so self-deprecating in regard to that. His famous statement about when someone asked him, "How do you get this power? Do you spend hours and hours in prayer?" And he said, "No, we just turn off the TV, have a Diet Coke, and go heal the sick."
Yeah.
And what he was trying to say, he was demythologizing the thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also know that his personal practice was very much focused on, God, I need you, and I need to connect with you, so that the day becomes an expression of your will, not mine.
Yeah, and so you learned that in a new way through burnout.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it can be a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we move on, just because I know a lot of people experience burnout, I mean, if it isn't too personal, like what brought you to that spot?
What brought me?
Yeah, what brought you to burnout? Yeah, what was it just lots of ministry?
Yes.
Yes. Tell me about it.
So this was our second church. We planted after, so 82 was that first church, and then in 88 we planted our second, which was what was called the Bryanston Vineyard, and the way that church grew initially was through, I was doing a lot of counseling ministry. I was teaching marriage and personal growth courses, and so people were coming to the church as a result of that, and many of them were coming to counseling as well.
Yeah, they wanted you,
and they wanted me. So, in fact, it's the reason I wrote. I've written 3 books, and the first 2 were, one was called A Practical Guide to Intimacy in Marriage, and the second one was called Learn to Love Yourself. So I thought, if I give them the book, then I won't need to do all this counseling.
You hope.
Exactly. And exactly the opposite happened.
Yeah.
People found problems in reading the book that they didn't know they had, and then they wanted counseling even more.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was in fact, we had both congregations. So I was still preaching at the first congregation, which was called Parkview Vineyard. And we had planted Bryanston, so I was preaching mornings in Bryanston and evenings at Parkview, preaching twice a Sunday, leading the team, training leaders, and doing, on average, 15 to 20 hours of counseling a week.
Yeah. You just had no margin.
I had no margin, and so. And then we were also, at that point, starting to become involved in a lot of translocal ministry, particularly in some of the poverty-stricken areas in our country. So I was overdoing it by a few hundred miles. And the second thing is, in my view, my inability to say no.
Where do you think that came from?
Some people tell me it's because I'm a middle child, and so I was always like trying to fix things.
Yeah, you work it out.
Being a mediator.
Work it out.
Yeah. And so I think it was that, and also, I think I had a strong sense, always had a strong sense of responsibility. But there's such pride involved in that, because
it's deceptive, isn't it?
It is. It is. You know, the real reason why we don't say no is because we don't think anyone else can do it as well as we could. And so, which is such a terrible way.
Yeah.
And that's self-destruction. So I must say, I did try to raise up other counselors. But as you said earlier, you know, people would say, I want you. And so it just never worked. And I think... So the day just came when I woke up one morning and I didn't want to see another human being. I stared at the floor for a long time and had no energy. And I experienced burnout in all of its glory.
Yeah. And what's interesting is you talked about this at the first of the podcast about when you got saved, that the initial response is you woke up to nature and you started loving people.
Yes.
And then that grace works in your life and works in your life and works in your life and works in your life. And then all of a sudden you end up this spot where you don't want to be with people anymore.
People become your problem, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yes.
So the very activity of the Spirit can bring you to a spot, if we don't have healthy rhythms in our life, where we want to resist it in some way.
All those things that you thought you had repented of suddenly come back.
In a new way. Thank you for telling that story, because that's going to be helpful.
Yes.
All right. Hey, to wrap up here, can we just do some quick hitters?
Yes.
Some real quick ones?
Sure.
What's your favorite place you ever visited?
Whoa.
Do you have one?
I think probably Greece.
Really? Okay, why?
It's the country of my soul. Somehow.
Oh, you just feel it.
There's something there.
There's your heritage, your people.
Yes, my soul comes alive in a different way.
Food and wine isn't bad though either.
Yeah, the food and wine is great. The lifestyle is beautiful.
That's right.
The people, I love the people.
Yeah, warm. Okay. Favorite book besides the Bible?
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, the trilogy. Oh. Yeah, that's right. All right. Yeah, gold star. Favorite sport?
I love most sports, but I think probably my favorite is rugby.
Okay. Did you play rugby?
I did.
Okay. Man's man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watch it and think, those guys would break me in half in 1 second.
They're mad, yes.
Yeah. And the South Africans are tough.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I sometimes watch them and the Australians and the New Zealanders play.
Yes.
It's amazing. Okay, last one. Favorite musician or band?
Dire Straits.
Really?
Mark Knopfler. I always say, I know one thing about heaven. I'm going to learn to play the guitar like Mark Knopfler when I get to heaven.
That's right. Man, what a great one. What a great one. Great answer. All right, very last question. We ask everyone on this podcast the same question at the end. Costa, could you just tell me a time you experienced great joy?
Wow.
Any time in your life, and it doesn't have to be the most. Like maybe it's just top of mind awareness.
The birth of every one of my children.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably the top.
Yeah. How many kids do you have?
4.
All right. Boys and girls? What you have?
We have 1 boy and 3 girls in that order.
Okay.
And all of them are married, and they have produced for us 10 grandchildren.
You're rich.
That is the best career I've ever had.
You're rich, my friend. You're rich. Oh, this is great. Costa, thanks for sitting and talking with us.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Adam. Thank you.
Yes. And hey, thanks for the stories you told today. They touched me. And for those of you who are just listening, clearly this is a podcast. Costa and I shared a few tears here this afternoon. That was great.
Yes, we did.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we hope you will check in next Monday. Peace.
Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Keller, Events Director for Vineyard Worship. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple of ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.